The classic argument, something I believe deeply to my core, is that new technology only ever increases the amount of jobs available. Because, a few hundred years ago, 90% of us would be working in farms doing hard work. And like today, I don't know, prompt engineer didn't exist even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? These are new jobs. The difficulty, though, is that this is happening exponentially and getting much better. So I'd actually prefer for there to be a bit of a slowdown because I honestly think if all progress stopped today, I would still have like 10 years worth of figuring out how to really use the stuff we have right now.
Hi everyone, my name is Stella Garber and I'm co-founder and CEO of Hoop, a new app that helps busy professionals capture all their tasks across tools like email, Slack, and meetings. I always forget one of them. I'm here today with Mike Taylor, who is a prompt engineering expert, to talk all things AI and how we can more easily integrate and think about how to use AI to make our lives easier. But first, I'm going to let Mike introduce himself.
Hey, good to be here. I appreciate you having me on here. So I'm Mike. I call myself a prompt engineer these days, but my background was I ran a marketing agency. I grew that to 50 people, and I left in 2020. Got access to GPT-3, and then, the rest is history. But yeah, I recently wrote a book on prompt engineering as well. It came out through O'Reilly. So yeah, very deep in this AI space now.
So you literally wrote the book on prompt engineering.
Yeah. I haven't used that line yet, but plan to.
So, okay, let's just jump in initially into the prompt engineering.
Yeah, so when ChatGPT came out, there was a rush of people using it and experimenting with it. And even before that, with GPT-3, when the model wasn't as good, there were loads of people experimenting and figuring out that, hey, actually, you do get much better results if you say this instead of that, or if you word it slightly differently, or if you use this kind of structure when you're briefing the AI on the task that you're trying to get it to do. Prompt engineering is really, at its core, just this process of discovering a set of inputs that you can give the AI that will get you more reliable and better outputs. Because as you know, building Hoop, these things can make mistakes, they can hallucinate, they can work really, really well in 99 out of 100 cases, and then that one case it goes off the rails. So mostly I'm working with companies like Hoop where you need to A/B test this stuff and say, not just can I get better at prompting, but I'm going to be writing this prompt that is powering a certain part of my application, and I need this to work 1,000 times out of 1,000 or 1,000,000 times out of 1,000,000, and optimizing that whole system that brings the right inputs in to get those outputs.
So I know even for myself, learning how to prompt and getting better at prompting has really made AI, like ChatGPT specifically, way more useful in my daily life. I feel like a lot of times when people tell me, oh, I tried ChatGPT, but it wasn't very good, or I didn't know how to use it, it comes down to not understanding that the prompt is like everything. Yeah. So when people are getting started with prompting, and I just want to say, I feel like ChatGPT had this format of like you have to input something before you see an output, and they didn't give a lot of guidance to like regular people about how to increase the value. So what do you usually tell people who are just getting started?
Yeah, so it's really interesting actually, because I think AI is very different to how we expect a computer to work, right? Because it's giving you different responses and kind of reacting to what you're saying to a much greater degree, then people try and treat it like a computer, and it ultimately fails. But really what you have to treat it like is a new employee, right? Like if you just hired an intern and you only spent 5 minutes trying to get them to do a task, and then you gave up and fired that employee, that would be insane, right? Like it might even be illegal. So really what you need to do is think about, okay, if I was doing this task from the very beginning without the knowledge that I have, and I'm just this overeager intern, what would I need to know in order to do this task? Like what context do I actually have in my brain that the AI doesn't have? And I think if you can frame it that way, then it's just going to get much better results, even if you don't use any kind of specific prompting techniques.
I feel like the real key there is the context. So can you talk a little bit more, when you say context, what specifically do you mean? And maybe you can give some examples of common things that people are trying to do in ChatGPT and the kinds of context that would be helpful.
Yeah, so like one of the first things I did a lot of was blog writing, and I was, first off saying, okay, give me an article on Google Ads, right? Or give me an article on, productivity, whatever topic I was writing about. And the content wasn't great. It was a bit boring. It didn't sound like me, obviously, because it sounds like, the average of the internet. It has this like weird academic tone that you can spot with ChatGPT.
It says words like synergy and streamline. And...
Yeah, delve is my favorite one.
Delve.
You can just Control F and search for delve on anything you get from anyone, and you can almost definitely tell it's from ChatGPT. Yeah, so that was my initial results, and then I was like really keen to get this working because I'm inherently quite lazy, and I wanted to automate all of my work. So what I realized was it's not writing a good blog post. It doesn't sound like me because I'm not giving it examples of how I write. And I have a specific writing style that's come from all these past experiences and stuff. So one of the first things that I always say for people to do is just to give it examples of that task that you've done before. And you can fit a lot in there. Like when I was using GPT-3, you can only fit like a few paragraphs of text. But today you can fit 120,000 tokens in GPT-4. Or, kind of think about this as like the size of a Harry Potter book.
Wow.
Right? It's huge, right? Yeah. So, you can put a lot of examples in there. You can put all of your life's work in there, basically, right?
Okay, so that was one example, and that's one that I like to use as well because there's so much generic same writing, and that's what the ChatGPT is pulling from. Mm-hmm. But giving your own writing especially if you have some sort of style or quirky personality or tone, or I put together like a voice and tone guide actually for when I use ChatGPT, which is funny because having run a marketing team before, that's something that you put together for humans, right? You put together a voice and tone guide so that everybody is writing in a similar way across the team. All right, let's say maybe we can just use that as an example. The writing a blog post. Besides giving the writing examples, what else can you help ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, whatever it is? What other types of context can you give it, and how can you structure your prompt to get better results?
Yeah, so one thing that catches a lot of people out, even people who call themselves prompt engineers on Twitter, they'll say like, hey, here's my big library of prompts, right? And the reason is that every single system that uses AI in production, you split the task into multiple smaller tasks, right? Like you wouldn't have just one prompt that does everything. Just like if you're a human, you wouldn't have just one ticket in Asana or in Monday.com. You would take the whole thing that you're trying to achieve, and you'd break it up into steps, and then you would try and do each step. And you would want to see which steps are pretty easy to do. Like if I needed to get a team doing these different steps, who would I hire? What would they do? What context would they need to do just that specific step? What are the inputs and outputs of each step? And when you chain all these things together, then you get the final thing. So going back to the blog post example, one of the big improvements and results I got was when I noticed if I split it up into multiple steps, where first I take some kind of research, and I'll use the search capability in ChatGPT, and I would say, okay, I'm writing a post for a client about the Icelandic volcano, right? I was working with Iceland Bank for a while, and the economic impacts of that. First, I would get it to research that, and then I would the next step I would say, okay, now give me some interview questions that I can ask my client to get their expertise and insights on this specific topic. And then I would go, send them to the client, they would come back, and then I would take the output of that step, and then I would say, okay, based on the research and based on these interview questions and answers, now can you write an outline for the blog post? And then once it's written the outline, and you can kind of go back and forth on that, then you take all of that information, you say, okay, next thing we need to do is to write like the opener. Like what is the headline? What is like the first paragraph, the hook in the first paragraph? Because if you don't get that right, then people don't read the rest of the post. Mm-hmm. And then once you have all those things right, then you can say, okay, now iterate through, write section 1, write section 2, write section 3, and so on and so forth. So once you break it all down, it does a much better job at each individual step. And then because you've broken those steps out, you can also then include much more examples of that step. So if you have a certain way that you like to do blog outlines, you could just give it 10 blog outlines that you've written in the past. It's going to follow a very similar structure to how you actually do this yourself. And you can do that at every stage and optimize each stage independently.
So that sounds like a lot of work, which is not surprising that if, to your earlier example, an intern would require a lot of hand-holding. So for people who think that AI, like working in this way, is not, you may as well just write it yourself. Do you feel like it is making you more productive, or what's the advantage?
Yeah, and it's a really good point because a lot of the times people don't really need that much prompt engineering. If it's just a task that you're going to do once and then you might not do that task again, or you only do it a couple times a year or whatever, it's not worth automating, right? Yeah, you can use some prompting best practices, but you don't have to be really strict with the way you follow these principles. But if this is something that you're going to be doing a lot, so with my blogging, I got to the point where I had this system and it was working really well, and then I pumped out like 200 blog posts in a week.
Wow!
Just from
there
that.
You go.
Yeah, and like that was because I was doing an interview for each blog post, so that was what took the time. That was the part that I didn't automate. But I have friends who've got like a fully automated system, or they built tools where you can scrape a bunch of content from the internet, write your own version of that content, and it's all automated, and they're pumping out like 4,000 blog posts in a few hours, right? So that's the difference. It's like worth scaling this if you're going to be using it again and again and again. And that's how much effort is worth being put in there, because it might take you a long time to get it right. But once you get it right, then it's just a click of a button or just following a series of steps in order to pump out the next one.
Wow, that's insane. It always makes me think about what the end game is here, because obviously you're constrained. Previously, you'd been constrained by time and quality, but with AI, and specifically the writing example, it just feels like, how do you think that's going to affect just the way people consume information on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, Google must be worried,
right?
Because it's getting harder and harder to avoid AI slop. But then again, I think it's only really a temporary situation that AI answers are slightly worse than human answers. It might be soon enough that people just don't go to Google and they go to Google's AI assistant instead. And they've already started to put that into the search results.
I don't use Google anymore. I just use either ChatGPT or Perplexity.
Yeah, because ultimately the AI answer is already in a lot of cases much better than what you get from Google. And humans make stuff up too, right? Like just because you found it in a Google search doesn't mean it's any more reliable than ChatGPT.
Yeah, totally. Do you sort of have your favorite one that is your go-to, or do you use each one differently depending on the task that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I would say that I'm an extreme outlier with my focus on AI. So you wouldn't necessarily take exactly what I'm doing. Like someone asked me the other day, which one do you pay for? And I'm like, all of them, because I'm kind of like,
you're a professional, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, like it's important for me to know like how each one is working. But I would say every few months, the model that is best changes. So, up until fairly recently, end of last year, I was mostly using ChatGPT, but then trying other models occasionally for different things, or trying to use cheaper models, like if I was working with a client and they needed to do large-scale AI stuff, we'd try and use an open source model or something like that. Then Claude 3.5 and Claude 3.6 came out. Claude is currently the best model, in my opinion. A lot of people share that opinion. I'm using it for like 90%. It's writing 90% of my code, for example, when I'm building stuff. But it's also a great creative partner, so I also use it for my blog writing. It just has a bit more character to it, and it's better at stylistic changes. I would say ChatGPT is, Claude is awesome. It's like really starting to feel like a personal assistant rather than like a functional thing. ChatGPT feels very functional to me. It is more reliable, though, I would say. And the O1 model, I pay for the Pro one. It's like $200 a month.
Yeah. What do you tell just like maybe your tech-oriented friends who aren't AI experts? Do you tell them to just pick one and sort of use that for everything because it's building up context as you use it more? Or how do you think about that?
I would say that if you're not using AI really much at all, it doesn't matter between the three major models which one you use, because just the difference between no AI and AI is the biggest leap, right? So, whether you have like Google as part of your workspace, the bolt-on kind of thing, or whether your company needs to use ChatGPT through Azure or Microsoft, whatever, like that doesn't really matter too much. I'd say if you're not using AI, like they're all pretty good and they're all getting much better. And because it's so competitive, then whenever Anthropic gets ahead with Claude, then OpenAI releases something and then Google releases something. So they're all fighting for it.
It's crazy. It's such an insane time. If I think about the advancements of the last year, it just feels like we're at this really momentous moment in history of rapid change and innovation. You're like in the front seat. Do you feel like it's we're gonna peter out at some point and hit some sort of a maximum, or how far do you see the innovation going?
I think about this a lot, and it worries me that I don't know. But
that makes me feel better.
Yeah, you would argue. I think the classic argument, something I believe deeply to my core, is that new technology only ever increases the amount of jobs available. Because a few hundred years ago, 90% of us would be working in farms doing hard work. And today, I don't know, prompt engineer didn't exist even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? These are new jobs. The difficulty, though, is that this is happening exponentially and it's getting much better. So I'd actually prefer for there to be a bit of a slowdown because I honestly think if all progress stopped today, I would still have 10 years worth of figuring out how to really use the stuff we have right now.
So for really busy people who are just trying to get through their day and manage their work, what are some resources or things you'd recommend to learn about prompt engineering or to stay on top of what's happening, but not in a super overwhelming PhD way?
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously a bunch of papers and stuff online, and you can use AI to get
to learn about
to help
AI.
you read them, right? That's what I do. I'll if someone shares something I don't understand, I'll dump it into Claude and I'll say can you just explain what they found here? So you can actually be a bit more scientific than you realize. Actually, that stuff is getting more accessible. So it's causing the problem and also solving the problem itself. Whether you like Elon Musk or not, that's up to you. But I'd say Twitter is probably the best source of recent information. I recommend just finding a few people to follow there. Typically, everyone will comment on each other's posts, so you'll find other interesting people through there as well. Don't try and keep up with AI because it's already too big of a topic. There's so much going on. Instead, I would try and focus on one specific area. So one area that I'm focusing on and going deep on is multi-agent systems. This is a little further fetched, but rather than just talking to ChatGPT, what happens if you could talk to lots of different AIs at once? So you can have them all kind of making decisions in the system, and then you get the kind of collective wisdom from that. So that's a very niche area that's currently there's only 10 papers to read. So I can actually get to the bottom of that, but I'm just ignoring most of everything else. And you have to trust as well that if you're also talking to people like yourself who's working in AI, everyone else has got their own kind of niche or their own area of expertise, and you'll just hear about the most important developments naturally through those people. So as long as you have a group of people that you're talking to, they're also kind of forward thinking on AI, whether that's in your company or amongst your friend group or extended network, then you can come to them and say, hey, here's what's happening in multi-agent simulation, right? If something big happens, right? And then you get the benefit of, you can come to me and say, hey, we just tried out Gemini and it made a massive difference to how things work at Hoop. So I think that's the way that you keep on top.
It definitely feels like the early days, even though things feel very advanced, there's still so much excitement and so much unknown. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. And where can folks find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so on X, I'm hammer_MT. That's my username. I'm always on there, easy to get into contact. Also, my book is on Amazon if you want to check that out. If you are a developer, I'd say it's worth. Otherwise, don't buy it because it's a lot of code. But it's Prompt Engineering for Generative AI. It's got a picture of an armadillo on the front. You'll spot it.
Okay, great. And I will link to that. And thank you again, Mike.
Cool. Yeah, good to talk.